Being recorded.
I'm looking at Larry Jaffe on the screen, who was with us in the very early days of Alvarado, South Florida. And I think you're in your 100th year now, Larry, and still quite active and still innovating and creating new things. That's our job, that we should all be, when we're 100, looking forward to being 120, still active and still creating. Okay. We have been choosing a story, it seems, at random. We've been choosing for the first two sessions from the Tales of the Hasidim. And then last week we chose from this huge tome, the Book of Legends, Sefer Agadah. We're going to choose from Buber. We felt that would be easier to work with. And it's important each of us know the story. It's not necessarily important that each of us have the story directly in front of us. You recall that we begin a session with a commitment, with an intent. And if you can imagine what your intent is for this hour, what it is that you would like the takeaway to be from an hour.
I'm trying to remember how to do it.
How to create an intent. Well, we're going to do it with finger writing in the air or finger writing to actually take your intent. My intent is to bring the Messiah. You know, I could do that. I could write down my intent is to bring the Messiah before the hour is over, if that's your intent. But actually to verbalize your intent, and so that you'll be focused in the course of an hour on what it is that you want to do. And actually take the risk and write it in the air. I'm going to watch your handwriting. Okay, my intent is. Oh my God, that's a long sentence. Okay, and you can go back and cross your T's and dot your I's, and you have an intent. Something about choosing a story. It isn't random, and it's also not miraculous. It's somewhere in between. It could be coincidental or synchronous. If you're familiar with the system of four worlds, every interaction exists on all four worlds. It depends upon in which world you engage it. A coincidence is just things bumping into each other. You know, I bumped into Harry yesterday. That's a coincidence. That's random, especially if it wasn't Harry, it was somebody you didn't know. A coincidence was I was just thinking about Harry and I bumped into him yesterday. A synchronous was that I have this contract and I've been looking for Harry and I need Harry to sign this contract. And then suddenly there was Harry at the next table. And I said, this is extraordinary. Miraculous is that out of this relationship, community and new structures rise that never would have come into existence before if this meeting hadn't taken place. And all those are happening in the different worlds. Now, the other truth, if you like, is that between any 2 points in the universes, plural, there is a straight line. We know that on this table, from that point to this point, there is a straight line. And if I wanted to meditate along that straight line physically, from here down the length of that straight line. But between me and between you, there is a straight line. Between any of you and any of these boxes, there is a straight line. Now, the straight line isn't physical. The straight line is relational. So here I am physical, there you are physical, but my line is going through the world of action into the world of formation and moving directly in a straight line to you, so that if I addressed you personally along that line, the intimacy we would create along that straight line might become substantial. But if I should choose just one of you, that would be to the exclusion of everybody else. Now, if I say we're going to choose a story, and the story will reflect upon something that is important to us at this particular time. there will be a straight line between that story and something in this particular time. It's our task through a meditational or a process of consideration, if meditation is too difficult a word, to find that straight line and then to draw that out. And like any straight line, it can continue that way and it can continue this way. And that's how it is that stories never end. So consider what it is that your intention is. Does anybody have a particularly powerful intention? I'm not asking you to share it, but there was an intention that felt strong to you and was pretty well grounded. Anybody around the table, or was it but a casual intention, or just finger whittling in the air? Who had a fairly good intention? Yeah. Let me have a page number, please. First, volume 1 or volume 2? Volume 2. And a page number from 1 to like 304.
287.
Again, please.
287.
Page 287. Did I do that right? I think I might have. Yeah, we still have.
We have so many great choices.
We have lots of stories. Oh, just great. Oh my goodness.
This is amazing. What?
Well, this is our initial story. We're not limited to a single story here. Speak unto the children of Israel is the title of the story. When a disciple of the rabbi of Lenchno visited the rabbi of Kotsk, his host said to him, "Give my greetings to your teacher. I love him very much." But why does he cry to God to send the Messiah? Why does he not rather cry to Israel to turn to God? It is written, "Wherefore criest thou to me? Speak unto the children of Israel." So my announced intention was to bring the Messiah. I don't know what your announced intention was. And I thought I was kidding.
My intention was to contribute to the discussion.
Say it again, please.
So my intention was to contribute to the discussion.
Well, you've definitely, his intention was to contribute to the discussion. Well, you're definitely contributing to the discussion. I had this text earlier. Bruce and I were learning earlier. When wise people come to you, I'm paraphrasing now, Bruce, you forgive me. When wise people come to you to complain about the wickedness in the world, let them know it's their fault. The fault isn't with the wicked people. The fault is with the wise people who come to you complain that there's wickedness in the world. There's a relationship between that text and this text. But why does this person cry out to God to send a Messiah? Why doesn't he rather cry to Israel to turn to God? You understand that? Let me go back a couple of weeks. We had a series of stories that had to do with the state of the rabbinate. That in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the hierarchical rabbinate wasn't working, that the Baal Shem Tov was a coach from the side, and that had to interrupt the sermon because there was too much ego involved in the sermon and such. I had a call recently from a person complaining about what was happening in his synagogue. It's not my synagogue, but what was happening in his synagogue. And he said, I said, why are you complaining to me? It's your fault. This is why I'm not a pulpit rabbi. Why are you complaining to me about what's happening in your synagogue? What's happening in your synagogue is your fault. What do you mean it's my fault? I said, you see it happening and you're letting it happen. You're not up in arms. If you think that there is a fault there, you need to address it. So it's similar here. There was once a family that considered itself to be politically active. There was a mother, the father, and a college-age child. And the college-age child looked at the world, looked at what was happening to the climate, looked at what was happening to the culture, and looked at what was happening to our democracy. And said, how can you let this happen? How are you letting this happen? How could this be? And over again said, how are you letting this happen? How can you let us be? And ultimately, the parents sat down with the child and said, we're hearing your complaints. It's your fault. What are you going to do about it? He says, what do you expect me to do about it? What can I do? What can you do? Now you're in this story. You're complaining. I've heard all of you complain. I haven't, but we'll pretend that I've heard all of you complain about what's happening to the climate, what's happening to our democracy, what's happening in our state, what's happening with our governor, what's happening with this. What can you do? That's not looking for an answer. It's a rhetorical question.
Well, an observation. Sometimes in spite of our doing something, we can't effectuate the change that we want.
I
It's
hear,
beyond our power.
I hear that. Now, the difficulty is they can't hear that very well. So learning how to work with a hybrid group of people means if we're asking the people on Zoom only to respond in chat, if you have a response, you can't do that. My fingers won't do it either. I understand that. Well, I'll share this. The son said, well, what do you expect me to do? In other words, I'm parroting Diane. What do you expect me to do? I mean, the climate is huge. The state of it.
No, I'm saying even if one takes action.
Even if one takes action.
If one votes.
Even if one votes.
Marches.
Even if one marches.
And writes to their.
And writes to their representatives.
And still, it
And
doesn't
still,
affect the change that one wants.
That doesn't affect the change that one wants.
At least we try.
No, you are wrong, 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 and wrong.
How do you really feel?
What was that?
How do you really feel?
I really feel that you're wrong.
That's 5 wrongs.
There are 5 wrongs and only 4 worlds. In every instance, you've affected change. In every instance, I'll tell you what happens in this story. The son really thinks about it and says, what I could do is write a letter to the senator. What good is that going to do? So he goes to his wife's parents and says, I could write a letter to the senator about what that is going to do. And the parents said, well, did you write it? He says, no, because what good is that going to do? Well, obviously, it's not going to do any good unless he writes it. Okay. What happens in the course of his writing it? In the course of his writing it, his position becomes clearer. In other words, he has to articulate in writing, just the way you did with your finger wiggling, what it is that his intent is. That intent is power in the world of Yetzirah, in the world of formation. And so he goes off and he writes the letter and he says, I've written the letter and I sent it, but I haven't gotten any response. And these wise parents said, you did get a response. He says, now what else can you do? He says, well, I can vote, but voting isn't until November. So what could you do in anticipation of voting? Then he thought about that. And what he did was he made an application to be a poll watcher. In writing the application, he hardens his resolve, because now he has to imagine that not only might I be a poll watcher, I might physically be at the polls where I am watching, and there might be exposure or there might be risk. And I am willing to some tiny degree to put my life on the line. When I put my life on the line, my position becomes harder. And so with each of the things that you mentioned, her resolve becomes harder, more fixed, more focused. And if that were transmitted to the people of Israel, those who wrestle with the divine for the sake of furthering the purpose of the universe, resolve would be hardened. Motion, action would be focused, and change would be inevitable. Right. And this is what the Kotzker is saying. The Kotzker is saying, why do you call out to me? Why do you expect the Holy One to send the Messiah? It's you who bring the Messiah. And you bring the Messiah through your actions, through your agency. And without your actions, without your agency, you expect your partner to respond? No, you have to hold up your end of the partnership. Parenthetically, I'm very proud of my son Cleveland, who is making application to be a poll watcher. What a neat story. You want to choose another story?
Me? Oh, from this page?
Yeah.
I'm reading this first one over again. Wait.
You
Can I send
want
one?
to? You have
Should
more
I send
time?
or not send?
Hmm?
I have so much to say, but I'm trying.
Can we continue the story, or do you have a teaching?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I stayed quiet,
Okay.
because
Now,
I don't know if it's really continuing the story the way that.
It is. Again, I mean, we mentioned this last time, that to teach through story, everybody can grasp the story at whatever level they're at. So Charlie can grasp it, and does. I know this from experience. Even Jesse can grasp it. Okay. So that each of us is grasping the story in whatever world of experience we can. Teachings, however, are different, because the teaching is given to a tranche that is at a particular level, a madrega, a level of learning. And if you don't have the vocabulary, you can't hang on to the teaching. If you don't have the foundation, you can't follow the teaching. But teachings have value, that they get stored away, and as your education increases, that teaching falls into place.
Like, I keep thinking of I don't know if this is maybe the what's it called? What's like the prequel?
The prequel to the story. Does that does that count also?
Absolutely.
A
The
prequel?
story goes way down beyond Rob Rosen there. It just keeps going.
So the prequel is seems to be, it keeps coming up. It's the Lech Lecha moment. It's God appearing to Abraham and saying, Lech Lecha, go. And there's a beautiful, I'm shifting to teaching, but it's also part of the prequel. So go with me. But there's a beautiful teaching from the Ishbitzer that talks about how what Abraham noticed, right? He quotes the story of this burning castle. It's a very famous midrash. It's a story that it tries to contextualize what Abraham's Lech Lecha moment was. What was it when God said go? What was that moment? And this story, the parable given is that Abraham was walking and he sees that there's a burning castle, and he says, "Who's the owner of the castle? What's happening with this castle? Where's the owner that allows this castle to burn?" And God appeared and said, "I'm the owner of the castle." And that's the midrash. That's the piece of text. And the Ishbitzer Rebbe reads it beautifully, and he explains that Abraham noticed that the world was on fire. He noticed that that he felt that the world should be different than the way in which he was actually perceiving the world. Right? That's what that moment was saying the world should be different. The castle shouldn't be burning. There should be something that's happening here. The world is different than the way I feel that the world should be. And the Ishbitzer explains that was actually the moment of Lech Lecha. That it was that moment, that it was the question of who is the owner of this castle that led to God revealing God's self to Abraham. That it was the question of noticing the depth of his own feelings, being the driving thought of like, the world should be different, right? That feeling that we all feel, right? That piece within us that encourages us and pushes us to do something different, seeing that the world needs to be fixed a little bit. It's that realization with the disconnect between our own depth of our own selves and the way the world actually is. That was the initial encounter of like our peoplehood with God, which then leads to this story. That was the prequel, I think,
Yes.
I don't know if I did it the right way there, but.
So the child goes to the parent and says, this palace is burning. Our democracy is burning. What can we do? Is there nobody who's in control of this palace? And as if he hears, yes, I created the palace and it's burning. Now, what are you going to do about it? It's your job to attend to the burning. It's your job to write the letter. It's your job to be a poll watcher. It's your job. I got to remember your various other wrongs.
Vote.
What was that?
Vote.
Vote. Anything else? Okay.
March. Protest.
March, protest, vote, right? Okay, because all those go into the summary. Okay. With each of those things, I recall COVID restrictions. Wally and I, an elderly couple, let's make it a story. An elderly couple are confined to their condominium. They're in quarantine. There's a march being organized for Black Lives Matter. It's after George Floyd. And the march is going to go right down beneath their balcony and such. But they can't leave the apartment. And if they get up on the apartment with the noise of the march down below when it comes by, nobody will be able to hear anything that they say. So what do? They get a old sheet and they get markers and they write Black Lives Matter on the sheet. And then by the time they get the sheet out there on the balcony, the last part of the match has already gone by. And they said it's too late. He says it's never too late. And just by the writing on the sheet, you've already begun. But if you hadn't written on the sheet, it would have been one step less done. In other words, you took it from the realm of creation into the realm of feeling and committed it to action. And that alone is going to motivate you towards more action. What a great story.
I don't know where, I don't know if I really
There's no question.
have a point to where I'm going. We were talking this morning about the idea of surrendering and what is it? Oh, it was about this. That's what we were talking about. About tonight, how there is something about surrendering to whatever stories present themselves to us. That's part of what this process is like, right? We show up and we actually pick the story, and from the story we're able to, right? Like we're actively involved in the process of this unfolding of what we need to encounter. So to, right, and it is also that Lech Lecha moment. It's engaging in that calling from within, not for the sake of completing what it is that's bringing us and beckoning us to get involved in the process to begin with, but it's to actually being involved in the process. Meaning it's not about, right, the fact that the sheet never made it off the balcony, it doesn't really matter. That's not the point. The point is that you actually felt and experienced what that calling was for, and you engaged in that process.
Well, this, yeah, it's a story, so I'm pretending it wasn't us.
Nah, the couple in the story.
The couple in the story.
The couple in the story, right? But they engaged in the process. And that, I think, is the point, is like, it is to, yes, vote and do all of the things. But the fact that we may not actually see the final say in all of that is not the point. We may not get there, but it's that we're involved in that process. And by being true to what it is that we're being called to, and surrendering to the flow of that, but surrendering not in a place of complacency and like not actually being involved in it, but surrendering because that's actually what's being called of us and asked of us, to get involved in the way that we can. So surrendering to our role in that, regardless of the outcome of what our role in that will be.
You remember to write that down.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have the recording.
No, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. We need another page, and we need another intention. Page 20 on volume 1 or volume 2? Volume, I'm not sure that's going to work well. We'll find out. Yeah, it's the introduction. How about volume 2? Would volume 2 be all right? The answer is yes.
Volume 2, no,
Page
the
20.
parts of page, 20.
20 in volume 2.
Also intro. Charlie, go for a higher number.
We need a big number. 200
250.
250, volume 2,
Sure.
page 250. That's getting you probably back in Kotsk.
250. Wait, do we want to do the
What?
tech with all of this?
Sure. Were we doing 250?
250.
250. Oh my God. Which one do you have?
I mean, I just read the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, we both looked at the same one. It's a, this is from Rabbi Simcha Bunim. Rabbi Simcha Bunim said, man is always passing through two doors, out of this world and into the next, and out and in again. I'll repeat it. Man is always passing through doors, two doors, out of this world and into the next, and out and in again. There's some vocabulary here. This world is Olam Hazeh. That means this physical world of space and time. Olam Haba is normally understood as the next world. And in non-Hasidic thought, it's usually thought to be the world that will come into existence after this one ceases to exist. Now, if you understand it that way, how could that possibly be? Because if you come out of this world to the next world that comes after this world ceases, how could you then come back to this one and go back and forth? But Simcha Bunim's understanding of those expressions is different. He says this world is this one right here around this table. The adjacent world is the next world. So the adjacent world is the reflection of this world in the adjacent realm. So imagine that this table here is this world. And if you like the notion of above and below, there's a familia shamala, there's a family up above. Above this table, there's another table. And around that table are the angelic representations of each of us. So a person is moving between one's physical experience and one's adjacent experience in the adjacent world. Does that seem magical to you? I assure you, it happens to you almost every day, and not just at night. Surely at night, 99% of your awareness is in the adjacent world, and only 1% remaining in the physical if you're sleeping well. And as you wake, your awareness shifts from the adjacent world back down to the physical world. And so you're moving from one to the other and back and forth again. Now the question is, why? There was a spiritual seeker relating, I think, to the notion of wanting to perfect his soul. And he went up the mountain, of course, to see the spiritual master, because they're always up the mountain. And he said, how do I do this? And he said, well, here's what you do. Here's a bucket. At the bottom of the mountain, there is a lake, a pond. Once you refine once you purify all of the water that's in the lake, you will purify your soul. So he goes down and he has a bucket, and he takes out a bucket of water, and he removes it from that world. And then he has to figure out what to do with it. And it's unrefined water. So he has a filter, an experiential filter, and he pours that water through this filter of experience. But it goes back into the lake. And he says, well, what do I do? And he goes back up to the spiritual master, and he says, well, I took one bucket of water, and I took it from that world, and then I put it through this screen, through this filter to purify it, and then, but it fell back into the pond. And the spiritual master says, well, go do it again. And so he goes all the way back down, and he does it again. And he picks up a bucket of water from the pond and removes it from that physical world to the world up above where he's holding it, filters it through this filter of life experience, if you like, and it goes back into the pond. And he goes back up and says, I've done it twice. And he says, go back and do it again. And again. And again. And again. And again. Because doing it only once isn't going to accomplish anything. It's with every action that you take that you remove a bucket from the lower world, and you pour it through the filter of your life experience. And then it goes back into the pond of soul, if you like. And you keep doing this in the course of a lifetime. And by the time you finish the lifetime, your entire pond of soul will be refined. So, I lost it. What page was it? 250. Rabbi Simcha Bunim said, I'm adding the word Simcha because that's who it is. Man is always passing through two doors, out of this world and into the next, and out and in again. A person is always picking up a bucket full of soul, filtering it through life experience and pouring it back, picking up another bucket of soul, filtering it through life experience, pouring it back. And the more that a person does that in the course of a lifetime, the more refined is the entire pond of soul. It's all right?
It's beautiful.
Simcha Bunim would like that?
I believe so.
Good. So that's an extension of that story. If any of you have read The Curse of Blessings, the small story book that was published by Perseus Books, a beautiful, beautiful edition. It's very hard to find in hardcover now and expensive. But you can download a copy for a few bucks as an ebook. It's not beautiful, but all the stories are the same. It begins with a story that's ordinarily attributed to Simcha Bunim, but appears in every tradition. I've seen it in Hindu tradition that's used in the business world. There was a royal archer. How many of you know the story of the royal archer? How many of there in Zoom world? Mike Hurwitz knows it. You know it. Go get The Curse of Blessings, look it up. But that's a Simcha Bunim story. And the story never ends. It keeps on going. I've yet to find an ending to it. It can go on forever. Let's have another page.
283 in the first volume.
283, first volume,
You had that one ready to go.
pretty much. Harmless?
Mm-hmm.
Not a good one.
I don't know what the word harmless means. Rabbi Shlomo used to say, if only the Messiah, the son of David, would come. At a pinch, I myself can be the Messiah, son of Joseph, who precedes him and is killed. What is there to fear for me, and whom shall I fear? Shall I fear the crooked Cossack? The people thought he was calling death a crooked Cossack, and were very much surprised at this. Excuse me. And we're very much surprised at this. Again and again, the community of Ludmir asked him to come to them, for many of his friends lived there. He always refused. But when envoys from Ludmir came to him once more, it was on Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd day of the days of the counting of the Omer, between the feasts of Passover and the revelation at Sinai. He asked them smilingly, and what do you do in Ludmir on Lag BaOmer? Well, said the envoys, just as what is usually done. All the boys, big and little, go out into the fields with their bows and arrows and shoot arrows. The story of Simcha Bunim was about the archer who shot arrows. You talked about Lag BaOmer at dinner. The rabbi laughed and said, well, if that's the way it is, if you shoot, that makes all the difference. Then I will come to you. There's a story of miracle working rabbis in this period. Apparently this rabbi was one of them, and he resisted going. The corresponding story is based on Talmud Ta'anit. there was in Talmud Tanit, it teaches about prayers for rain. And if there is a drought, you fast. And the fasting of the people of Israel attracts the attention of the Holy One. And the attention of the Holy One sees the plight of the people of Israel, and as an act of grace, brings rain. There was a rabbi who was known for his powerful blessings for rain. And this community was suffering a drought, and they sent the rabbi to come and pronounce the blessing for rain. And the rabbi said, it's a long trip. Whereas I pronounced the blessing, free of charge, for the time that I spend for the tircha, the trouble I have to go to, I deserve compensation. And it's expensive because I travel first class. And they said, but we really, really need you. And so they spent the money to bring this rabbi a great distance, and the entire congregation came to hear the rabbi's blessing for rain. And the rabbi stood and he uttered no blessing. And they said, we paid a lot of money to bring you here. Why don't you say the blessing for rain? And he said, because you have no faith in my blessing. Why should I say a blessing for rain if you have no faith? And they said, but we paid the money to bring you. And he said, but you didn't bring umbrellas. It's a joke, but it's not a joke. What it is the faith of the people that is a precursor to the blessing. Without the faith of the people, the blessing has no power. Now, what does that have to do with this? The fact that you go out into the field on Lag Bomer and actually do something and play with bows and arrows is what they're doing, is enough of an act of faith to encourage me to come to be with you. If all you did was tell the story of going out and shooting bows and arrows in Lag Bomer, but you didn't actually do it, I wouldn't bother. If you actually talked about writing a letter to your senator, but didn't actually write it. For those of us who are familiar with pulpit, all we do for the most part for Lag Bomer is talk about what is done on it, but we don't do it. In the Chavurah, however, those
We've lost the sound.
this is too much fun. We need another page, volume 1, something beyond page 70,
118.
118.
Volume
Yeah, sure, you would have chosen a very, very long story. It's Pinchas of Koretz in his school.
How about 119?
119 is also pretty long.
We got that top one. I don't know what it says.
Okay, it's a top one. It's called Bloodletting. Are you sure you want this one?
Let's jump in.
Jump in. Why don't we have a different voice? Let's hear you read a story.
I'm gonna read a story.
You're
I
gonna
don't
read
know
a
if
story.
that's- Really?
Yeah, you're really going to read a story.
That's a big deal. Okay. When Rabbi Pinchas visited the Baal Shem Tov for the first time, his host looked at him for quite a while and then sent for the doctor to let his guest's blood.
Oh, blood as a form of healing. Okay, not as a form of vengeance.
But before he began, the Baal Shem warned him to be careful to do it right. For so he said, That is holy blood preserved ever since the 6 days of creation. If you are not quite sure your hand is steady, he added jestingly, better tap my vein.
That'll tap my vein.
Can you read it again? Is that the whole thing?
Yes, that was the whole story.
Could you read it again?
Yeah, I get it now. The my is very important.
Yes, the mind is very important. Try it again.
This is why I don't read stories.
The
When
stories-
Rabbi Pinchas visited the Baal Shem for the first time, his host looked at him for quite a while and then sent for the doctor to let his guest's blood. But before he began, the Baal Shem,
To let his guest's blood means to open a vein and draw blood as a.
We've lost sound again.
the guy to let Reb Pinchas his blood. But before he began, the Baal Shem warned him to be careful to do it right. For so he said, that is holy blood preserved ever since the 6 days of creation. If you are not quite sure your hand is steady, he added jestingly, better tap my vein.
Jestingly.
It's a lot of honor given to Reb Pinchas here.
A lot of honor has been given to Rabbi Pinchas. Wow. Rabbi Pinchas visits the Baal Shem. This is the very first time he comes. The Baal Shem looks at Rabbi Pinchas.
Sound has cut out again.
No sound.
He do it correctly. For he said, you know, the blood of this man has been preserved ever since the 6 days of creation. If you're not quite sure that your hand is really steady, you better tap my vein instead of his. There was a father who had there was a mother who had a 7-year-old child and took her to the doctor for a vaccination. The daughter was terrified of needles. And the mother said, you don't have to be terrified. This is for your benefit. This is going to help you. It'll hurt only for a moment, but it'll keep you from getting sick. But the little girl was terrified and wouldn't let it happen. And the doctor said to the little girl, what if we gave the injection to your mother first? And the mother said, but I'm terrified of needles. And the girl said, well, I'm not going to have a vaccination unless you have one. And so the mother bared her shoulder and squinched her eyes, and the doctor very carefully gave her a vaccination. And then the doctor turned to the little girl and said, well, you were right, it worked. We got your mother to have a vaccination. I'm not sure Charlie took all that in, but she'll explain it later. For down at that end of the continuation of the story, we have the mother and the daughter, and both of them vaccinated. Okay. Another page. We got plenty of time, 7 minutes. Come on, risk one. 218. Volume 2, 218. Boy, I'm gonna have to listen to the recording. We've done all these stories. You want to do it? Okay, I'm not going to read it. You're going to read it
Sure.
so I can understand it. What's
Okay.
the title?
The Change in the Work. When Rabbi Hirsch returned from his wife's funeral and went up the stairs to his room, he was heard saying to himself, "Up to now I have accomplished holy unification by marriage here below. Now I shall try to accomplish unification by marriage up above." 2 weeks later, he died.
Oh. When Rabbi Hirsch returned from his wife's funeral and went up the stairs to his room, he was heard saying to himself, "Up to now I have accomplished holy unification by marriage here below. Now I shall try to accomplish unification by marriage up above." 2 weeks later, he died. It is said of the Holy Baal Shem Tov, when his wife died, he said, "I thought when she was with me, we would be able to restore the entire world. Now I can only restore half a world." Well, that's an existing story. You see a continuation?
I do, but I want to. Give me a second.
You want to work on it?
Yeah. Because that's not the end of the story,
No, it can't be the end of the story.
which then totally transforms the whole story itself. The fact that it's not the end.
The first human was male and female, and then divided.
The first human was male and female, then divided according to a midrash. That the word tsela, which is in Christian translations translated as rib, that a rib was taken from the man and formed into the woman. And in Jewish understanding could be a side, that the earthling was put into a deep sleep and then divided one half from the other, one half being masculine and the other half being feminine. And so you had equal partners. Now, that isn't our invention. That's not my story. That story goes back about 1,800 years and is in the rabbinic literature.
In heaven, they're reunited.
Mhm.
In heaven, they're reunited.
In heaven, they're reunited. Well, it depends upon your understanding of soul and whether soul retains its integrity. Here, the understanding is they can be reunited up above in this story. There was a holy master whose marriage was so wonderful. The marriage was an entity itself that was revered in the entire community. And when the holy master lost his wife, They were in mourning. The entire community was in mourning, not only for the loss of the wife, but also for the loss of the marriage. As the Holy Master completed his period of mourning through Shiva and then through Shloshim, returning to the synagogue, they saw that when in the morning he put on his tefillin, it took him much longer to put on his tefillin than it used to. And they came to him and they said, Master, in the past, it took you only a matter of seconds to put on your tefillin. And he said, now the work is much greater. He says, now I take the tefillin for the arm and I put it up here and I bind myself physically into the world on my biceps. And then I wrap it around like so, all the colors of the rainbow, if you like, connecting me now through the realm of feelings to what is below and what is above. And then I unify all of the worlds, all four worlds in thought, and I bring that unification to me right down here. But then I put the strap on my ring finger, where I used to have my wedding band. And that marriage I had with my wife no longer exists. But every morning I draw her down in the form of the Shekhinah from up above. And I hear her say to me, Erastichle, I betroth myself to you. And I say, Erastichle, I betroth myself to you. And so I unify the feminine presence of the divine and the masculine presence of the divine. And that takes a long time to do. And that's why it takes me so long now to put on tefillin.
Perhaps that was the 2 weeks.
Hmm?
Perhaps that was the 2 weeks. Perhaps that was the 2 weeks at the end of the story.
The 2 weeks at the end of the story? 2 weeks.
That's what the tefillin were like.
Well, this brings us to the end of 4 weeks.
Yes.
We have some work to do. We need to, go back over all of our sessions, see how they worked, imagine how they would work in a physical atrium. Because as we imagine how our space is going to be used, those will be the directions that we give to the architects. And we say, this is the type of program. Don't build the center the way centers have been built before. We have to reimagine what a synagogue is going to be. What type of programming is going to draw all the denominations and the generations together. And then what type of space are we going to need? What type of technology are we going to need? What space are we going to need to house that technology? So this is the challenge ahead of us. And this is what Adam and I, as program members of the program committee for the Central, for the Center for Jewish Life Miami are about. Creating virtual programming right now. Eventually that will be going into a physical space. So those of you around the table and those of you who are out in the world of Zoom, you've all been part of this experiment. We will resolve to continue probably in September. And I would appreciate whatever feedback that you have. We have your comments on chat, but also if you would like to email either of us directly, we would love to gather your comments and suggestions of how this can be structured differently. And again, the intent is there should be some element of spontaneity, that in order to create a level playing field, we have to feel the exposure. and greet everything fresh. We can't come in with prepared material. Otherwise, it loses its intimacy and its force and strength. It's always easy to fall back on stories already told and teachings already taught. But tonight we discovered some new stories that have never been told before. Especially that last one, I have to remember it. No, maybe it was the one before that. Maybe it was the one that Diane instigated. Maybe all of those. We're going to stay online. You can unmute yourself, talk to each other, say hello. We realized that by coming, we can stop the recording though, Jasmine, if you're listening.
I can do that.
Oh, you can do it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're the host. Okay, the recording's stopped. So we have an opportunity to say hello to each other or talk if you like to do that. We found that over the months, community does develop on Zoom. We can't say hello to Sophie because she's not here tonight.
I have a question from last week.
Recording has not stopped, just in case anybody cares about that.
Yeah, question
When
from
we
last
finally
week.
got the brief in the law,
Yes.
that females are excluded. That was my question.
Yeah,
We never got to it.
well, actually, it's.
Did you read the
read,
summary?
read the summary?
Uh,
I gave you a shout out in the summary.
Read the summary. It just went out this afternoon. The summary is going out very late, and we have to adjust that too. But read the summary. Adam has a beautiful teaching on that.
okay.
Okay, it's there.
Call me.
He's been asked that question before.
Once or twice.
Lou, what do you think about this type of learning?
I hope you're going to continue the hybrid, both in person.
Continue the hybrid.
A lot of people who can't make it.
Oh, yes, but would you come or would you prefer to stay on Zoom and not travel?
Well, I'm gonna have to tell
I
you.
understand.
I came for the hot.
You came for the hot dog.
If you come in person, I'll make you a hot dog.
Well,
If you come in person, I'll make you a hot dog.
I'd like to see us try to use some breakout rooms so we could develop stories together or in small groups.
Sue,
before you do that.
Sue, our intent this morning, our intent was to begin the session with a breakout room, so that in pairs, so that each pair could review the story for a couple of minutes. And so we would begin that way. But the difficulty is if in an hour program, we can choose, should it be an hour and a half? Hours seem to work pretty well. But if we interrupt the flow and the intensity and the concentration in the middle of the session, the fear is it would be very difficult to bring us back together again. But our intent was to begin, we just didn't have the technology set up properly. But we can experiment again with different ways.
We could also close with breakout rooms.
We could, what, please?
We could also close with breakout rooms for those who want to go into, like we could do the hour, and then for those who want to stay, do breakout rooms.
I lost.
What about that? Did you hear what Adam said? That,
I didn't. Adam said that we could end with breakout groups. I think it might be fun to have the breakout groups come back and see if there's anything that came up in the groups that they'd like to share with the whole community.
the difficulty with that is that it really, really slows down the process.
And also, not everybody loves breakout groups.
I know.
Okay, so end with them.
I was thinking of two things. One is when I lived in New Mexico, we had an Orthodox, we had a Lubavitch community, all in one building. We had a Reformed, we had 3 congregations, and it was very beautiful. I've never experienced it in any way like that, where we would use the different rooms, and we had, it was a beautiful way to study. And I felt last night at Zalman's Yorkside, where there were rabbis and people from all over the country and Israel, the world, and each one bringing what they have brought in the years since Zalman passed and since he's ordained. And people like Lynn Gottlieb I haven't seen in years, and all of her changes, and Sheffer Gold. It was very beautiful. And so it feels in the direction of what you're trying to say, that we don't have one voice, but I love the idea of having, like in Santa Fe, having a Lubavitch community, having a Reform community, having a conservative, and all eating together, joining together. I
Okay,
love
Paula,
that. Yes.
That's likely to happen. The understanding, Beth David will surely have space in the new center because it's on the property that was Beth David, but it is open to other congregations and other groups that would like to have activity there, both Jewish religious groups and cultural groups. So that will be, it'll be a matter for the center administration to determine how to allocate space and time. But that surely can happen, and it's anticipated that it will.
I love the idea that when someone like David Zeller would come, or Shlomo, that they could also speak to reform or renewal, is what I hear it now.
Paula, I just said it will likely
You
happen.
feel like that will. Okay, it's beautiful. I love that.
It's under discussion.
Great.
I would like to suggest something. Can you hear me?
Sure.
I think the Center for Jewish Life is one thing, and what Paula just talked about, that will happen because it's interdenominational, interreligious. But in terms of how this particular study session happens, I think the idea of having breakout rooms, I agree, that would totally stop the flow. A lot of people don't really come for breakouts, but because breakouts can be a positive thing for a lot of people, to have something that would be like a spin-off from the storytelling class, that people that want to tell stories, write stories, meditate on stories, do whatever they want with stories, can have a spin-off into another adjacent to an adjacent world of storytelling. And that could be a group where people come and tell stories, interpret stories. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I heard what you said. One thing that we might consider is, having breakout groups after the
Yes.
session, pretty much like we have now, but
Yes.
people want to gather into a group of 4 to discuss the session or something like that. Then,
Right, and that's optional. It's not part of the class.
No, it wouldn't be part of it. It wouldn't be recorded either, obviously. And
Right.
All these suggestions have real worth, and we're still figuring out what this technology permits and what it keeps us from doing. There are limitations to it, and I'm privileged to have such a challenge, and
Good.
also such a partner sitting next to me. Other thoughts?
Anybody here?
Okay, we will wish you all a happy 4th. Go out and enjoy the fireworks.
Okay, just a note as we prepare to disband, registration is still open for the Havurah courses online. Mitch is teaching one the last 2 weeks in July, and the retreat in person at Isabella Freeman, August 14th through the 18th. You can find us at havurah.org.
HAVURAH.org. I look forward to seeing you there also.
Yes.
Happy 4th.
Happy 4th. May the 4th be with you.
Kol Tov.